All right, here we go.
Good afternoon and welcome to StockTalk. My name is Sean Kabak and I will be your host along with Pam Iwanchesko and Lori Forbes, who will be providing assistance. Manitoba Agriculture is offering a series of livestock and forage webinars to help Manitoba beef and forage producers. The webinar started in December and will run monthly until April. We are glad you can join us for today's presentations, which will be recorded for you to view at a future date, or if you can't make the 1 o'clock start, you can always watch them later on. So next week is Manitoba Ag Days. This year there is an admission fee being charged. So try to get your tickets in advance, as this will help to get into the doors and into the Ag Days displays. Manitoba Beef and Forage Week was held at 4 locations this week, and today we will feature 2 of those presentations. For producers who signed up for the herd management program, you have until the end of January to purchase bred livestock and then submit your claim. We are seeing lower energy on some of the hay this year, so producers should be watching body condition on their cattle and may have to increase the energy level with some grain or silage or a higher energy type feed. Luckily, we have had a milder weather in January, which has made it easier on the feeding program. Because our presentations today are pre-recorded, we won't be taking any questions for the presenters. We're just starting to see the auction marts open up this week after the Christmas break with prices higher. Calf prices in the fall of 2022 were very strong, and we're up 40 to 50 cents per pound compared to 2021. So to give us a cattle market update and outlook for 2023, we have Brenna Grant from Canfax. Brenna is the executive director of Canfax and has been with the organization since 2007. So now we will watch Brenna's presentation.
And the last 3 years have been a roller coaster of supply and demand shocks for agricultural commodities. You know, we've got.
Can you stop that, please?
COVID that we went into lock.
Not seeing it yet.
Should I stop sharing, I guess?
Yeah, try that. Yeah, I did. Did your option come up below? Just try again and just go to the webinar or the recording like we did before. So start sharing again. We could hear it, but we couldn't see it.
Down and has shifted our food system into retail.
How was that?
And our consumers
I
found
can
that
hear it, but I cannot see it.
Okay.
Maybe I'll turn your camera off. Try sharing it again. Got it.
Okay, we'll start playing now.
Thank you.
$1 can go at retail, and we actually saw a surge in demand in 2020. But we also had plant shutdowns, backlogs of cattle to work through, bottlenecks, and then drought in 2021, record high feed costs. There have been lots of challenges over the last 3 years, but halfway through 22, things started to turn a corner, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. We got rain, patchy rain. Some got it, some didn't. But in the second half of the year, we also saw leverage start to shift from the packing plant back to the producer. And so we started moving in to a rally of prices here in the fall run that is expected to run through all of this year. And what's driving that rally in prices is the fact that historically we've seen global protein supplies of beef, pork, and poultry increase pretty consistently year over year. And this is due to population growth, but also growth in disposable income. As consumers have more income, they want to up their protein. You start at the bottom of plant protein and you work your way up to poultry and then red meat. But since 2015, basically things have plateaued. Lots of different reasons for this. We've got African swine fever in Asia that really took out a lot of pork globally. Avian influenza keeps circling the globe. Lots of different challenges, market challenges, challenges on the cost side for producers, not just here, but everywhere. And what we still have is we still have a growing population. We still have growing disposable incomes. There is demand there for the product. It's a matter of having the prices work through the system. And so we've got really strong international demand. In 21, we saw beef exports back over 500,000 tons for the first time since 2002. We're going to be there again this year. And not only have we seen these increases year over year in volume, we've seen even greater year over year increases in value. And so in 21, overall, we were up 20% in value. This year to October, we're up 5% in value as we continue to see really strong international demand. Now, some of that rosy picture started to soften in the third quarter. We've got a lot of consumers in countries around the world concerned about recession, concerned about food price inflation, and higher costs. We've also seen our Canadian dollar drop in the third quarter, and that's actually made Canadian beef more competitive in some of these countries. Some of those countries are Japan, where we're actually going to see record high exports this year, topping over 70,000 tons. We've also seen really strong interest in Korea, where exports are looking to double. And so overall, exports into Asian markets are going to be steady around 120,000 tons, despite the fact that we've been out of mainland China for a year. And that's as we see strong demand in the region really picking up and taking up the slack without China being there. So domestic demand, I mentioned that surge as consumers found out how far their retail dollar could go in 2020. Beef really led the rally in food price inflation in 2021, and it really challenged our competitiveness at the meat case, and we really saw demand back off as consumers were saying, it's just a wee bit too hot. But here in 22, we actually saw cutout values really stabilize, and that allowed for some price corrections, and it meant that our retail prices also stabilized, and we've actually seen other commodity prices increase faster in 22, really closing that gap as they catch up with beef. And it's really put beef back into a competitive setting. And I just want to remind everyone to remember that demand does not equal consumption. So demand is a consumer's willingness to pay. So we're going to talk later about tightening North American supplies. When you have tighter supplies, it really does impact per capita consumption. That doesn't mean less demand automatically. It's about how the consumer responds to those fewer supplies and if they're willing to pay the price that actually tells us what their willingness to pay is. So back here in the first quarter of, of 22, we had record high retail beef prices, and we were, quite frankly, uncompetitive at that time with pork and poultry. We were outside of that historical trading range. But as our retail prices had a correction in the second quarter and came back to be in line with year-ago levels in the third quarter, we actually went back to historical price relationships. And this is really important because when we're within those historical price relationships, even when a consumer is seeing high prices, they tend to trade down within the category of beef, from steak down to ground beef. But when we're outside of those relationships and beef is more expensive than pork and poultry in terms of those historical price relationships, you then see switching between categories into substitutes. And that's one of, as we think about Conference Board of Canada estimating that consumers here in 23 will have to pay, on average, $1,000 more in groceries due to food price inflation. Having this price relationship in those historical averages is really important in terms of incentives to switch. And in previous recessions, beef has actually held up fairly well with that switching down as consumers keep beef on the plate. And the other aspect is we've really seen consumers' comfort and ability to cook at home really improve with the lockdowns as they've been trying out new cooking skills. So we had drought in Western Canada in 21. The US had drought in 22. And the big thing we're watching in terms of moving forward this year is, are they going to have a second year of drought, and how that's going to impact feed prices here in North America moving forward. And basically this top one here, you see all this dark red, that's from November. It's lightened up a bit here in the far western side, but it is still pretty bleak. They're probably going to have a second year of drought with some improvement in some regions, but it's not looking good at this point. But overall, that's meant that their herd has been contracting and is down 6% from their peak back in 2018. And their production here in 22 was really supported by record large cow slaughter and culling rates. But overall, with the drought, they had early placements into feedlots back in the summer, and that's really going to support their beef production in the first half of this year. So beef production is projected to be down only 4.5% in the first quarter, 7% in the second quarter, but by the time we get into the third quarter and the second half of this year, we're looking at beef production being down 8.5% and even more going into the fourth quarter. So these North American supplies are going to tighten up significantly in the second and third quarter, and that's really what's going to drive a lot of these prices.
So that's 7.5%, or did you say 7.5 to 8%? Is that animals, or is that pounds per meat in the plant?
That's pounds per meat in the plant. That's a very good question. And the reason why it's a good question is because we're actually expecting smaller carcass weights, because we're going to have fewer heifers in the mix in some of these areas. And we are expecting, with these record high feed costs, that they're going to come in just lighter than what they did in 22.
I'm sorry, I missed it. Did you say that they're placing more heifers into the feedlot than?
So yeah, basically like we did, and I'm going to get there in a moment about heifer placements. We placed a lot of heifers in second half of 21, first half of 22 due to our drought. Guys weren't keeping heifer replacements. They're basically a year behind us. So they placed a lot fall of 22, and they're expecting to place a lot first half of this year.
Even with all this rain that they're talking in California?
Yeah, there's still a lot of red on that map. Basically, they've had 50% of their cows in severe drought every single month of 22. It's just moved around the country and hit everybody.
Just so I understand that, you're saying they are retaining
No,
heifers, or they're just going to the feedlot,
they're placing them into the feedlot.
but they're not retaining those heifers?
Correct. They're going to go to slaughter.
They're going, okay.
Yeah. So this is one thing, it is a wee bit confusing, because we do have a year difference between what's happening in Canada versus what's happening in the US. So timing is a wee bit different between the two countries. So Canada, our drought was 21. We got rain, yes, patchy rain in 22. Matt Makins is doing a quarterly weather outlook for us, and he's calling for scattered showers, thunder showers, here this spring and summer. So again, patchy rain. Yeah. So overall in Canada, we're looking at total beef production peaking here in 22. And I'm going to explain why here in a moment, of why we're looking at a modest decrease here in 23. So we're not looking at as big of a decrease in beef production here in Canada versus the US. But let's look at cows first. Overall, our cow marketings, which have been elevated, were up 3% here in 22, and a lot of that actually came in the last 8 weeks of the year with increased slaughter, and we had really strong cow prices in the second half of the year. But this is one that when you think about trading to lean trim, this is going to be a leading indicator in terms of what's going to support our cow market is that trim price that's expected to stay strong.
Okay. I'm still on the reduction. When do you figure that the biggest reduction is going to be? Within how long?
In Canada?
Yeah, and the States.
So I've already told you in the States it'll happen second quarter and third quarter. In Canada, I'm going to show you here in a moment.
Because all I'm saying is look in this room. How many two young people do you see here?
So I'd actually...
The rest of us, we're waiting for the price to go up so we can get out.
Yes.
I don't want to be mean, but...
No, it's happening.
Only two in this room.
And I'd actually say that it's already happened in many other places where the faces are a lot younger now at these meetings that I go to than what they were 5 years ago. And so a lot of guys have already gotten out. But in terms of tightening numbers, cattle on feed, we were elevated in the first half of the year. We dropped below year-ago levels in August. On December 1st, we're only down 3% from year ago, still up 7% from the 5-year average. So even though we're talking decrease, it's a modest decrease in Canada, and we still have lots of cattle coming forward. And so what are the two things that are driving the reduction? First of all, heifer placements, and this first half, this red line of 22, these are really elevated heifer placements that we saw going into feedlots. And then we got that rain in June, and basically we dropped right back to the 5-year average in terms of what heifers were going into the feedlots. And so that's where a big swing in terms of timing of when fed cattle supplies are going to tighten up here in 2023 is with reduced heifer availability coming forward to slaughter. But the other main driver in terms of availability over the last several years has been our net feeder trade. So Canada became a net importer of US feeders in 2019. And in 2021, we were importing 250,000 head net. And so this is US feeder cattle.
Why don't we have an RCAP? Americans have?
Well, that's because the feedlots don't want it. And what it's meant is that while our cow-calf herd has stayed steady, we've actually had expansion in our feedlot sector significantly since 2015. And these feedlots are being really aggressive in terms of filling those pen spaces. And that means that even with those really high feed costs, it wasn't until December of 21 that we became a net importer. And while we were basically net zero in the first half of 22, we saw this surge in the third quarter of imports. And that was due to relative feed costs. So we had been at a feed cost disadvantage, and then for 3 short weeks in September, we had a feed cost advantage versus the US. And that's really what supported a lot of those imports. Now, you guys located here in Manitoba, it's not just an Alberta story, you also have an Ontario story. And so this red line here is Ontario corn prices, and you can see basically since July, Ontario corn has been the feed cost advantage over both Nebraska and Alberta. And that's really supported their willingness to pay for feeders here this fall.
Dollar exchange, it made more sense for them to pay a US dollar calf, bring it up here, than pay us a Canadian dollar calf.
So our feeder prices were at a premium to the US market, basically all fall run. So they were paying a premium, and they were paying them for both Canadian calves as well as US calves. And that's why they come up here. So, yeah.
So you're saying we were getting a heck of a price.
You guys were getting better than US cow-calf producers were getting. Absolutely. So fed prices basically rallied all throughout the year, didn't have much seasonality, and that was driven by this really strong demand market. And prices, though, in the fourth quarter kind of sputtered out and were disappointing. And the reason for this is we went back to the weakest basis since 2014. And this is where we had record high carcass weights in October and into November, and it really delayed the shift in leverage from the packer to the producer. And so some of the price rally expected here in 23 is going to come from this shift in leverage back to the producer and a strengthening of that basis. But we really need to get carcass weights current, and that only happened at the very end of the year. On the feeder side of things, these are yearling prices. So we saw this rally here in the Alberta market was paying about $240 at the peak of things. Sorry, let's move back. The Ontario market was actually higher. They peaked at about $250 for yearlings. They had more volatility in the Ontario market though, but definitely saw some premiums out east. Looking at the calf market, we saw a big rally in August before the calf run, and in August, based on fundamentals of what live cattle futures were and the exchange rate and what we were thinking that barley prices were going to be at that time, we basically projected that black box there for fall prices. And you can see that prices ended up being outside of the box. And that was because feedlots were willing to pay in order to fill those pens and keep those calves here in Canada instead of having them sent south. In Ontario, you can actually see that prices rallied earlier. We actually saw price movement back in June and July before August. But again, prices were, up at that 270 mark, and just saw some more volatility from week to week there between the two markets. So when you think about going into a price rally for this coming year, I just want everyone to be thinking about risk management. And the last time we had a big price rally like this was back in that 2014-15 period. And, if you've gone through drought and you liquidated and you're looking to restock, or if you're a young person here and thinking about this is an opportunity before the market rallies in terms of building your herd, I just want you to think about this time period here in the fall of 2014, where there was a lag when we saw our calf market rally really strong, but there was a lag in response to our breeding stock market, particularly bred heifers. And there was an opportunity of 3 to 4 months where you could trade up heifer calves and get a bred heifer and have a calf the next spring. And the difference was about $400 per head to trade up. And so it's things to think about in terms of opportunities and risks. So just some factors to watch as we move forward. We have really strong domestic and international demands. And we are going to have tighter net beef supplies in North America moving forward. That's going to be driving this price rally. It's a real question of how consumers are going to respond to food price inflation and how competitive and resilient the beef market is. And one thing I would say is that over the last several years, the consumer's resilience in terms of willingness to pay for beef has really surprised a lot of analysts, and they've really shown that they're willing to put particularly high quality beef, AAA and prime, on their plate. As we think about reducing slaughter, it has occurred slower than expected, particularly in the fourth quarter. But when we look at those reduced placements from the third quarter, down 20% from the 2021 drought-induced highs, or even fourth quarter down 11.5% with those reduced heifer placement numbers, we are going to see things tighten up in the second and third quarter here this year. And as we get more current carcass weights, we are going to see that basis strengthen and that leverage start to shift. But this really is a market about risk management when you have record high feed costs. That's the biggest challenge for feedlots right now. But as we're in an inflationary market where all input costs are high, it's really looking at what can you control, recognizing there's lots of prices that are outside of your control. And we do have higher interest rates, which are impacting currency and exchange. So we've seen our exchange rate down to about 74 cents. But there's definitely volatility with that at that level, but it's been fairly stable here the last 3 months. So with that, if there's any questions.
What is the break-even point for the feedlot guy right now?
So break-even point for the fourth quarter was anywhere between $1.85 and $2. And basically prices in the mid 180s was not cutting it on the cash market. Basically, they only had 1 to 2 classes of cattle in terms of placements that they were break-evening on the cash. But you've got to recognize that as we have gone into this tighter supply market, the incentive for both the feedlot and the packing plant has to get as much supply forward contracted as possible. And that's for them to ensure that they're covering their costs as well.
And if we're in shortage of calves going in, why aren't our heifer prices going up?
So heifer prices.
And you find that your heifer prices are level or just below the steer prices, and that's not.
Yeah. So when you look historically in terms of that steer heifer spread, that steer heifer spread is directly related to differences in feed performance in the feedlot. And as our cost of gain increases, your steer heifer spread increases because it's directly related to your feed cost.
So what you're saying is that our heifer prices will still have a big gap?
Yeah, our gap is, as we have record high feed costs, we're going to see that a record high gap.
So with that happening, where are you putting the cow calf operator when you just say he has 50-50, 50 heifers, 50 steers? Pardon, yeah, 50-50 on heifers and steers. Where is his break-even margin? Because your heifers this year were up to, well, I seen in places up to 80 cents lower than this.
So we're going to end the presentation there. Brenna still had a little bit to go, but she was moving more into cost reduction. Canfax is the premier organization for cattle marketing information. They have a weekly summary report that's available by subscription, and it's one of the best cattle summaries, market reports available if you're interested in that type of information. But we appreciate Canfax being out this week for Beef and Forage Week, and that they can join us and bring that type of information to our producers in Manitoba. So we're just going, bear with me for a minute. We're going to switch presentations. So I'd like to thank Brenna for that informative presentation from Canfax. So next, we're going to talk about the benefits of cover crops to improve soil health and provide livestock forage. There's been a lot of interest in cover crops over the last few years, with producers growing a range of warm and cool season grasses and broadleaves with mixes of up to 5 to 15 plus crops. So we have Bart Lardner to discuss this further. He's from the University of Saskatchewan. He's a professor in the Department of Animal and Poultry Sciences, where he supervises undergrad and grad students and teaches courses and forages and beef cattle nutrition.
You'll need to share again, Sean.
Okay, thanks.
I can see your PowerPoint.
Okay, we'll just go to the video now.
They've asked me to chat about this particular topic. I'll give you a couple sides to that.
I can hear your audio and I can see the PowerPoint, but I cannot see the recording yet.
Okay, I'll stop it and then go back to it.
You bet. We'll get there.
Can you
Perfect.
see the screen now? All right, and I'll start the video. So this is Bart Lardner from University of Saskatchewan talking about cover crops to improve soil health and provide livestock forage.
I work with producers to find challenges, issues on your farm or your ranch related to getting that mama cow pregnant, the challenge of raising a beef cow in Western Canada with the cold stress, heat stress, drought stress. I'm in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and I've been at Lanigan for 25 years, up there on the left-hand side, and then in 2018 we moved to Clavet, Saskatchewan, so I was an hour and a half away, and now we're 20 minutes off campus. The fun part about my lab, it was 1,200 acres of grass and forage and grazing, and when we came to Clavet, we have about 15 quarters of land there that we have to share with a feedlot, research facility, but it never seen a cow before. So it's kind of a neat time to look at nutrient cycling and all those good things that go with it. All right, so I'm going to chat about managing beef cattle and extensive grazing, which has really been a big part of my program since 1997. And as you heard, we'll talk about this particular system here called cover crops, polycrops, whatever. It's got several names. And then we'll chat about some of the work that we've done, pros and cons, and then we'll come away with some implications. So my program is all about integrating the critter with the forage, okay? We're trying to go that 365 days of the year, so we have spring programs, summer programs, fall, winter, just like you guys, and try to do things in a scale where we can be applicable to you on your farm or your ranch. You know, we've looked at a smorgasbord of different forage types over the years, perennial and annual. You can't see it because it's cutting it off here on the bottom, but we're looking at anything new and different coming down the pipe. And that's teff grass on the left. That's a warm season annual. And we've been living in drought out there in Saskatoon, Clavet area for 2.5 years. So I'm sitting there trying to do a research program under 4 inches of rain that normally we get 12. So, you know, and so it is challenging. And so we're looking at opportunity. This is chicory. Okay, so that is a novel perennial as well. We're bringing it into your typical grass and legume species in rotation. It also has a claim to be an anthelmintic. Okay, so whatever. We're going to look at worm burden in the critters that are out there. There's a lot of the forages that we've looked at in our program over the years. These are all the perennials on the left-hand side. I'm sure some of you have them on your farm or your ranch. I don't know. And here's a bunch of the annual ones that are out there. And so I always say, you know, use a blend of perennial with annual forages. Don't just do what everybody else does or try and manage on native grass throughout the year. There's real opportunity with these different forage types. And so, but you know, all of them are not going to work for you. You have to figure out which one's going to work wherever you live, your ecoregion, going forward. So Brendan's going to chat with you after me, and really, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. That feed is the single greatest variable cost in your operation every year. It's always a challenge. Now, in 2021 and 2022, as I just said, we had a real drought situation, and we had no fiber, right? And so I'm doing webinars and talking about slough hay, ditch hay, kochia hay, right? Anti-quality factors associated, oxalates, nitrates, you name it. But it was all these guys had to put in front of their cow and try to formulate a diet. So it changes year to year to year. And as I already stated, is that we're trying to look at trying to put forages in front of that mama cow throughout the calendar year because they really are the foundation of the beef industry. That ruminant animal evolved underutilizing high fiber, low quality forages. Sometimes we forget about that and feed them grain. How do you mitigate rumen acidosis? Don't feed them grain, right? So if we can build in nutrient dense forages, there's an opportunity there. Okay, so just a real quick and dirty review of a nutrient program. You want to provide nutrients to that animal. I don't care if it's a 5-weight calf, a cow in second trimester of pregnancy, your yearling bull, replacement heifers, they need energy, protein, vitamin, mineral. And you should be aware that they're probably going to need the nutrient density in their diet at those specific times of the year. And we're going to try and supply them. There's some of our stockpile forage worked pretty well in that October, November, and then we get into December and we got a storm. All of a sudden, our energy requirements for her ramped up 20%. So that basal forage was not providing her adequate energy. You start to go backwards. You don't want cow condition to slip. So we have to step in and supplement. That eroded any cost savings for that stockpile forage program up till that weather turned bad. Here's another thing I suggest, and you're probably going to hear this because your ears are ringing: feed test, feed test, feed test. You know, what's the energy density of the feedstuffs in front of me? Nutrient density. How can I get through the, whether I calve in April or May, I don't know, right? Are my feedstuffs adequate to meet her needs? As I said earlier today in another talk, in 2010 we had 4 times the rainfall. Okay, we got the volume of feed, we fed the same amount of feed, but it was washy feed. And so we're just not giving them enough nutrients. And so we had cows coming in thin. We know thin cows don't rebreed post-calving. And there was a lot of wrecks in the spring of 2011. I'm not telling you everything you don't know. We're just reviewing here today. If you're going to go down this road, if you've been dry lot feeding or wintering your cattle, you might want to consider putting them out in the field with an extensive graze program. Then certainly there needs to be some wind protection, because that energy requirement is going to go up with the wind chill factor. Electric fencing, it's a tool. Some people have an aversion to fencing. It's up to you, right? And then, of course, where's that water point going to be coming from? And there's all kinds of programs out there today to help you purchase these systems and set them up in your farm or your ranch. This is just a survey with Western Canadian Cow-Calf survey program, and just showing that even here in this province that a lot of these producers have adopted 2 or 3 extensive systems. They don't put all their eggs in one basket. Why? Because I've had many a time where even us in the research world or our producers, they'll put all their heart into maybe corn grazing, set everything up in a swath graze program and get 3 feet of snow. On a corn graze program, we get a really wet fall, and we get a huge setup of mycotoxins, okay? And so have 2 or 3 systems out there. So obviously you can go from one to the other depending on your weather predictions or Mother Nature. She says, nope, you're not going to do this. That's what you want to see, and that's what we have them out on there, on that nutrient deficient acre of land on our farm or ranch, because we're trying to capture manure nutrients. The fecal material, the urine, We know the cost of nitrogen in 2023, right? So can we utilize organic nutrient sources? Yes, we can. In this particular instance, we did a pretty good job. We've measured lots of different systems, and this is just a snapshot of a study. We looked at swath graze compared to straw chaff, compared to bale graze. We're looking at deposition of manure nutrients, and we're looking at where did they land in that field. And here you have the windrows of the swaths, okay, in the winter feeding period, and that's where the ammonium and nitrate nitrogen density was. So could we extrapolate and look at this next crop the next spring? Did we see increased biomass? In this case, it was a barley green feed crop we grew for winter feedstuffs. So we know we're depositing those nutrients. Are they helping me for the next subsequent crop? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay, we go to how much N and P is excreted in fecal material or urine for a 1,400-pound cow. Because I chose to winter 64 cows, 110 days on that winter feeding site, and we know that some of it will gas off. Okay, nitrogen's a very mobile nutrient. It'll move in the surface, it'll volatilize off. I'm saying I can retain 70%, but because I chose to feed them out there on that field and not in that dry lot pen, I was leaving behind roughly about 100 pounds of N for the next crop the next year. Just saying. That's also what we're leaving behind. And, you know, it's a comfort level with extensive feeding or extensive grazing. It's, if you have machinery and that's your kettle of fish, fine. I'm not saying change it. We're just saying that, you know what, this is some of the work we've done. It's up to you folks to make that decision. But certainly, any residue that's left behind is going to be litter. It's going to capture that 1/10 rain. It's going to stop the soil surface from increasing in temperature, right? So it's a real buffer. It's an insurance policy for you, the producer. A little bit, and it's a slow release decomposition mechanism. We're no different than you. This is at Lanigan. This was the critters going out, and about 3 weeks later, that was the critters coming back home. So I always have to have plan B in my back pocket. We didn't lose that field. We came in the spring and we utilized it with older cows, but I was trying to background some 5-weight calves. It didn't work for me that particular year. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I'll expect them to paw through certain depths of snow, but not those freshly weaned cows. That was another field we had going on. This was some fall rye we were going to swath graze, and we had 2 freezing rains and a blizzard, and it just froze solid, and it was like asking them to consume frozen celery. So prehension of the feedstuffs too is a challenge. Even though, okay, I've got X amount of feed out there, I put them out there. What's the problem, you guys? Get at her. Well, they couldn't, okay? So manage and monitor, and it's going to, if their intake is challenged, then the nutrient intake is challenged, so we had to pull them, bring them back home, just like the last program. So why are we looking at extensive grazing programs? And that's those backgrounding calves that we're looking at barley and millet with. Why? Because it's not showing up here on the screen, but because of the high cost of gain. When you're trying to put pounds on calves, you know your cost of gain, I hope. And so you know that, okay, I'm going to retain them. I'm going to grow them from 5 to 7, whatever, 150 pounds, I don't know. Then I'll have a sale point for them after that, because I'm not good with the sale price at the sale barn that particular week. So we've been able to successfully do a lot of swath graze research with mature cows, and we're able to do some good work with these backgrounding calves. Okay, let's chat about what I'm supposed to talk about this evening, and that's cover crops, polycrops. So when I'm old enough to understand that the term cover crop meant nurse crop. What's a nurse crop, people? It's a crop you seed when you go to establish a perennial crop, right? So you're seeding that annual forage in with that perennial, like a metabrome alfalfa, I'm going to put in maybe a bushel to the acre barley because it's going to manage weed pressure so I don't have to run around with a herbicide can. Okay? So that, in my mind, was a nurse crop or a cover crop. Well, now along came about a decade ago a bunch of seed sale companies and started selling these mixtures. Well, there we go with our conventional cover crop. It's weed suppression. There's this claim of improved soil health. And of course, you want to maybe grow a crop for green manure. Which is a good crop for that? Sweet clover, right? So now we have these forage cover crops. And so let's grow that crop. We're going to provide some biomass for our critters to graze, right? And at the same time, we're going to maybe follow through improved soil health or improved soil characterization. Buzzwords, regenerative ag, right? Buzzwords. There's a lot of the claims, benefits that they're suggesting from cover crops. You know what? I'll buy in on some of them. Compaction, soil structure, organic matter. It takes about a decade or more. We can follow soil organic carbon. It might improve, and then if we have one bad year, we'll go backwards. Okay, so it's not like you're going to increase the soil organic matter tenfold or 10% in one 12-month period. It takes a long, long time. Mycorrhizal fungi, absolutely. Soil moisture, percolation down, right? Different rooting types, nodulation, suppressing weeds, right? So, yeah, some of these are probably worth a conversation. Some of them are claims that need a lot more research to prove or validate. This, my friends, is the biggest thing you're going to hear from Bart tonight. Grow legumes in your crop rotation. They're a natural fixation process, right? That symbiotic relationship with those rhizobial bacteria. 80% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Why not put them in rotation? Even an annual legume, pulse crop, right? Have it in there. Legumes and livestock. The thing with these polycrops is we see difference in rooting structures. We see some tap roots, we see some fibrous roots. So they're opening up the soil for aeration, for moisture to percolate down and not see those hard pans. Salinity issues. How many people deal with salinity issues on your farm or your ranch, right? So we're looking at some different saline-tolerant forage species, grasses and legume species that we can actually grow out there because that cash crop won't germinate. It's like a 7 on a decisemen scale. It's just too saline for a cash crop to grow. So let's grow a saline-tolerant forage, maybe roll it up, maybe feed it to our critters, right? Okay, so some other benefits of these cover crops, stability. Yeah, you have something there on the land base, reducing chemical use, may reduce input levels. The other thing is over-yielding, because now we're doing something other than growing a monoculture crop. And we're going to grow these cover crops on the same acre of land and get away from the 3 A's. What are the 3 A's? April, August, Acapulco. You guys, last group got it. They were shouting it out. So, yeah, don't go there this week, apparently. So, can I utilize that acre of land as many days of the year as possible? That's the deal, right? Instead of it being bare ground or stubble. You know what canola stubble looks like. So do these cover crops work for you? Like, will they work in your grazing program? And so because of all the conversation, and we see in a lot of companies selling them to you folks, I'm getting the phone calls. Bart, I got a train wreck over here. I lost 2 cows, blah, blah, blah. I got nothing but a field of weeds. Okay? So, maybe we need to do some work. Maybe we need to investigate what's going on here. There's your 4 functional groups. You have your annual legume, your cool, your warm season, your brassicas, which are related to canola, right? So you have your turnip, your radish, your Goliath, your Winford, all of these. And then they're suggesting to put in a pulse crop and a cereal crop. And it's okay. That's okay. And I'll have a little story to tell you about that deal. So there's your 4 functional groups. Crimson clover, Berseem clover. This is a good one, but you need a lot of moisture. That's a pretty good one for drought, okay? And of course, I'll talk about what I think is percent comp in your mix for the brassicas. So this is nothing new. We have short memories. This is back in 03. I was grazing turnips at Lanigan, Saskatchewan. So the above ground biomass and the tuber ones, and comparing them with beef cows. So I think we go around in circles sometimes. Okay, this is a long-term study that we've been doing. The reason I'm going to chat about it briefly is because there is a polycrop cover crop treatment in this particular study. And this is like we have a 165-acre study site, 4 treatments, 3 reps. I have to replicate things in research. I don't do a 1 year, sow it, grow, and show it. So we have 2 perennial systems and 2 annual systems. In terms of forages, my perennials are Metabrome sandfoin. My perennials are hybrid brome alfalfa. My annual here is fall rye clover. That's a crimson clover, people. And then here's my polycrop, manure crop, barley, pea, and brassica. This is unique in that it's a long-term study. I've got soil scientists, engineering dudes, veterinarians. We have economists on this particular study, measuring all kinds of things just to see, okay, what's the value of having these different forage types, perennial and annual, especially in drought years. It's been challenging. The other thing we're doing, and Melissa just talked about this, is we are measuring the burps coming out the front of the cow. So we're doing our best to measure enteric emissions, CH4 and CO2. And this is how we do it it's called a sulfur hexafluoride technique, SF6. And that's some of my crew out there putting these nice collars on them, which they hate more than poison. You ever see a cow go backwards 100 miles an hour out of the chute? Backwards, not forwards, when you put that collar on. Then we have these nose flaps, so we're capturing nasal vapors in this negative chamber 1 liter vacuum yoke. The other more expensive way of measuring emissions is these things called green feeders or GEMS, and they come out of Rapid City, South Dakota. So with the US dollar exchange, you can imagine the price of these babies. We guard these every night. So a couple of ways of just, trying to get some correct data on the enteric emissions of cattle, especially grazing forage systems. The one thing that Melissa brought up is that, guess what? Every one of those methane molecules that are eructated by your cow goes up in the atmosphere and through phytochemical reactions is converted back from CH4 to CO2 back to the plants, which take it up down to the roots and consumed again by the critters. So there's a recycling going on that they don't talk about. Fossil fuels, they go up in the atmosphere, they saturate the oceans. Okay, just saying. Here's our biomass from our 4 systems. Okay, our yield. There's our 2 perennial systems. Here's our polycrop or cover crop, similar to our Metabrome sandfoin. Forage quality, pretty good protein, pretty low fiber. That's the orange bar, people. And pretty good energy, okay? Here's our methane, cutting it off again, but our polycrop is equivalent to our fall rye clover system. Okay, now I'm going to talk about an actual polycrop system that we did about 5 years ago, and we compared this to a traditional swath grazed barley system. There's our 4 groups, okay? In that system we had annual legumes, hairy vetch, crimson clover, Italian ryegrass, sorghum, millet, our brassicas, and only pea. I did not put the cereal in this particular study. So this was the one treatment here, and we compared it to straight barley swath grazing program when we swath grazed the polycrop. There's our field in July, and here's our field in August. Looks pretty good. The flea beetles are having a fun old time with the brassica, okay? But a lot of that is leafy, but it is high moisture. Okay, for me, it's all about dry matter, something for the critters to graze. Maverick barley is what we compared it to, and I typically seeded at 2 bushel to the acre. There's our cover crop with our 4010 silage pea, and we seeded it June, and we cut it, we swathed the cover crop at 1800 growing degree day, and our barley at soft dough. There's our biomass. Okay, this is the barley here on the left, and there's our polycrop or cover crop on the right. So just not a lot of a lower yield, and this slide does not show it. Why? Well, there it is. Because of weed pressure. So we got to remember, the polycrops, they're a blend of mixtures, they're broadleaf and they're grassies, right? So what the heck do you do? Not to say that redwood pigweed is not nutritious for the critter, but you know, if that's what you get, that's what you get. So, and I did not put that cereal in this particular study, okay? But there's some of the brassica there. This is the other thing that we need to be aware of when we're grazing these cover crops, do a feed test. Because what we found was elevated calcium. Why is that a problem? It mucks up our cal-phos ratio, right? 3 to 1 or greater. So I got to feed limestone. We also saw elevated sulfur, right? Why is that a problem? Sorry? Brassicas. Ties up copper and zinc and manganese, right? Sulfates, high sulfate water. We don't want to go over 0.4% total diet. Nitrates, pretty high too. So there's our polycrop on the left. The critters were only able to utilize 60 to 70% of the swath. Why? Because I'll show in the next slide. And there's our barley crop, and we're able to utilize 5 to 8% of it because we had this freeze-thaw business going on. And so, you know, it thaw and then saturate our swath, and with all of those broadleafs in there, again, it was a prehension or a grazing problem with our polycrop. But remember, I did not put that cereal in this particular program. Cow performance, no difference in condition. We saw lower body weight, less body weight change, lower in the cover crop system. We had to bring in a sup on that cover crop because the cows were going backwards when it got 30 below. There was not enough nutrient density with an increase in energy. There was not. Less days on the cover compared to barley, more input costs for that particular study. Okay, now let's talk about what happened to the soil characterization out there with these polycrop compared to the barley. This is our downslope, I believe it is, total organic carbon levels, okay, and that's the 6-inch. There's down to 12 inches. So no difference between the barley and the polycrop. This is the upslope, well, this is the downslope, this was the upslope in terms of soil organic carbon levels. However, when we looked at total soil organic carbon mass over 2 years and comparing our polycrop to our barley, what did we see? We saw a greater amount of total soil organic carbon in our cover crop. Why? We can explain it because of the patterns of below ground root biomass from that polycrop. So those tap-rooted species, right? The barley is a fibrous rooted species. Yeah, you want to come away with a bit of a positive attitude. There's our root biomass yield. We asked our student to go out there and take root samples and wash all the dirt off them so we could weigh it. So interesting what's going on there. So there's some challenges in a program that did not contain that cereal. Now we just started a study last fall with another student of mine, and we do have a cereal in this particular program. Here's our 3 treatments. We have a straight monoculture forage oat. CDC Haymaker is a really good forage type annual cereal. Here we have what we call a simple mix, 4 species, 1, 2, 3, 4. oat, pea, brassica, vetch. Then we have our complex. So we have those 4, but we also include a vetch. Here's that teff grass I talked about, chicory, and millet. So we're measuring yield, quality, cow performance, economic, soil characteristics, and emissions in this particular study. We're also teaming up with our Ag Canada people. We have some eddy covariance flux towers out there with some collared cows, and we're trying to also measure gas emissions and validate this system against that system. This is the first study that I know of where we're trying to measure gas emissions in a fall and winter time period. Most of the work, all that work's been done in the summer when it's warm and less challenging. Briefly, here's our yield this year with about 4 inches of rain in a normal 10, 11, 12 inch rainfall area. We got about 2 tons of biomass to graze. And there's our nutrient value. Proteins were pretty good, and our ND fiber was pretty low. So not bad in terms of fiber or protein. Here's our body weight change of the cows that were out there on our program. Here's our oat cows. Here's our simple, our 4 species, compared to our complex. And so I come away trying to make a really early implication from this particular study in that I think this one supplied better nutrient density compared to this one because we maybe had too many species types in a more complex mixture. So I come away, and this is my kind of summary message, is that if you're going to go a polycrop route, maybe go to a 3 or 4 species total in your mix and make sure each one of those are going to A, germinate, and B, perform wherever you live, right? Because you're paying a good coin for this stuff. Implications. Let's just do a summary. Find a clean site. Weed pressure is a problem. However, with that cereal in there, we saw less weed pressure than the previous study. High sulfur potassium nitrates can be a problem. Okay, weather can be unpredictable. Test. I just asked my group to look for sulfur and nitrates just today on this particular study, and always have a plan B. Mother Nature will always set you up for a failure. Pick that variety that's going to work for you wherever you live. I'm suggesting only about maybe 15-20% brassica in the composition of that mixture. That's just my opinion, okay? That's my opinion. I really think there's a window for these things. I think it's in that summer slump, in that August-ish, September-ish, October-ish. We went right to just before Christmas with this particular study, so, you know, it's in there somewhere. Yeah, there was a potential to increase soil organic carbon, right, over a short period in areas of low carbon levels on that grazing site that you grew this polycrop. So soil health is your thing, and so be it. All right, this is just a summary of all the research that we've done at Western Beef / LFCE over the years. I work with a really good economist called Kathy Larson. And so compared to dry lot feeding, that's some of the work that we've done that shows that. Why are you adopting these extensive systems on your farm or your ranch? Because of that. There's my team, and that allows me to travel and do these type of extension events. And there's our website. And you can click on there, and you can watch a video, and you can shut it off after 2 minutes. You could not do that tonight. Thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank Bart for his presentation. Bart has a lot of practical forage management knowledge, which he's able to share with producers, which they like to hear. And also like to thank Brenna for her presentation on a livestock market update earlier on. So I just have a few slides to share just to finish up our stock talk. So our next stock talk will be held February 9th. We're going to go a little more in depth into the cattle markets. We have Rick Wright of Cattle Consulting giving us a cattle market update presentation, as well as Alan Monroe of Clarny Auction Mart talking about prepping calves for sale. In March on the 9th, we'll have a couple presentations, one on bull soundness and another one on bull buying tips. Then April 13th will be our final webinar on forage and pasture management. I'd like to mention Seed Manitoba that came out in December. The results of the McVet annual forage trials can be found here. One of the reasons for initiating the annual forage trials is annual crops are more moisture efficient than perennial forages, which is important in dry years. So the forage trials were held across 5 sites. In 2022, the objective of the program is to test different varieties of annual crops for forage yield and quality. And we had 15 different crops and varieties, 3 oats, 5 barley, 1 spring triticale, an oat and pea mixture, a barley and pea mixture, a proso and foxtail millet, and a sorghum variety and a sorghum Sudan grass. So check out Seed Manitoba 2023 for those results. There's a feed survey being held by Emma Stevens of Agriculture Canada and Kathy Larson of the University of Saskatchewan. The website address has changed from when it first came out. So if you want to participate, they're looking for commercial cow-calf producers with at least 25 cows, and there is a remuneration for those who participate. So basically, they're looking at what winter feed you use, whether you feed tests, ration balancing, and other methods to assess feed quality. So I encourage you to check out the survey. We do have a number of livestock and forage specialists across the province. Pam Iwanchescu is in Dauphin, Cindy Jack in Arborg, Elizabeth Nuremberg in Roblin, myself, Sean Kabak in Portage, Andrea Berthollet in Clarny, and Kristen Bouchard-Teasdale in Beausejour. So if you need any assistance, whether it's with rations, feed testing, forage selection, grazing plans, government programs, and more, feel free to contact any one of these specialists. And then there are the 10 Mask and Manitoba Ag service centers across the province. And we do have 1-800 numbers that you can access the different offices throughout the province. Manitoba Ag's website has a wealth of information. There are handy links on the right-hand side. You can see StockTalk link is there as well. You can access any of the ag webcasts, cost of production, cost calculators, that type of information. If you have hay to list, or if you're looking for hay to sell, you can access the hay listing there also. So that concludes today's Stock Talk. I'd like to thank you for joining. I hope you will join us next time on February the 9th.